to the aspects of the proposal, such as holding UEFA civilly liable, number 1. Number 2, making UEFA create policies and rules against hooligans. And number 3, banning fans from these matches. Do these constitute as a transfer of responsibility? Mr. Chair, what we argue with respect to those particular prongs of the proposal is that they are not an acceptance of responsibility. Rather, UEFA is pitching in comparable to the way concerned citizens pitch in because they recognize that they are in a position to do something about it. Therefore, they can help with the problem. However, does that necessarily mean that it is a transfer of responsibility? Because essentially, responsibility is twofold, Mr. Chair. It means that number 1, you do the majority of the implementation, and number 2, more fundamentally, the primary decision making with respect to what will be not implement. And what I'm going to talk about, Mr. Chair, is I'm going to take a lift off from the very premise of UEFA's profit motivations already presented by Tico. I'm going to talk about how the impingement on UEFA's profit motive creates a conflict of interest that we do not think UEFA will adjudge and arbitrate responsibly. The second argument that I'm going to make, and which deals particularly with this idea that you will keep the national authorities' forces only outside the football games, how this insensitive to the way hooliganism actually works. We say the status quo is a response to the snowball effect nature of football violence and how you cannot expect an effective national authority force standing only outside football stadiums, Mr. Chair. With that, let's deal with a bit of the argumentation coming from over there. We say, never mind that Italians are not known for hooligans. It's actually the English and the Irish. But let's also talk about the fact that past experiences with football fans who turn out to be hooligans is not unique to UEFA. In fact, because according to them, cross-border violence is so common, it means that different national authorities have already dealt with them in the past and are prepared to deal with them again. Such as in the model of Germany, where they dealt with World Cup, and that's actually one of the most peaceful World Cups ever, Mr. Chair. So we say, in that particular case, we find that in cases wherein there is a threat of hooliganism, i.e. the high-stakes players right there, Germans versus the Irish versus the British versus the Spanish, these are situations wherein the respective national authorities both have the experience and the capacity already to deal with that particular hooliganism. So what we argue, Mr. Chair, is that what we're arguing against is the idea of UEFA taking primary responsibility, particularly within the stadium. And in that particular case, it makes the problem to be dealt with only too late once you call international forces. Is it not? We say the nature, even if we say the nature of even coordination already implies power and influence for UEFA, and it's a power influence we are unwilling to provide them. Why is that? Let's go to my first argument on the impingement on UEFA's profit motive. How precisely does UEFA have a profit motive? We say, particularly in the status quo, it means that UEFA actually gets a huge cut, for example, out of airline tickets that follow promos going across borders. UEFA gets the biggest cut out of ticket sales. That UEFA gets the biggest cut out of franchises. So what's the point? The point here is that tightened security necessarily means fewer ticket sales and all that. Why is that? Because security personnel and equipment, number 1, and number 2, good stadiums mean higher prices for the tickets. What's the point there? The point there is that security personnel, the point here is that this means fewer people would buy these tickets and watch at the stadiums themselves. Instead, and this is what they did in World Cup, they watch at pubs and clubs outside the stadium, Mr. Chair, and start their hooliganism from there. But I'm going to get to that later on. We say, as Mr. Chair, the fact that there is an available substitute to enjoying the World Cup fever or cross-border match outside the stadium already means it's possible for UEFA to have less money, which is essentially a conflict of interest for UEFA. Do they prioritize security or do they prioritize their ticket sales? We find that it's impossible to entrust a private party to take care of security because we have always recognized security to be a national authority problem. And when there is no security, the ultimate blame goes to the national authority. That's our greatest incentive is on the national authority vis-a-vis UEFA. Therefore, in situations of conflict of interest, because we can conceive agree that even national authorities have an interest in the profit-making projects of UEFA. However, the pool of security is greater on national authorities than on UEFA. Therefore, we say there's greater tendency for security under a responsible national authority rather than UEFA. But far
Well, it is in an all-time high. How did that go about it? But second of all, assuming that obviously there's going to be fewer people, fewer sales, then we say that's which risk we were to take because UEFA is morally
that's completely untrue. The last case of probable hooliganism between Tottenham and Sevilla, Madam Chair, was clearly dealt with by the police forces in Spain, and they were prevented from escaping the stadium. If you want to check your matter, hooliganism is a thing of the 80s and the 70s, Mr. Chair. We say, in this particular case, it's improbable, that kind of characterization is improbable. But let's go to the idea of response to a snowball effects of football violence. Because how does football violence happen? They begin primarily at stadiums, but not necessarily at stadiums. And they get out of hand and blown up. Why? Because inside the stadium, it's cramped, it's hot, they're sweaty, and bodies are rubbing against each other. So they get mad easily. They said it. It's about emotion and how you ride the wave, Madam Chair. The problem here is if UEFA falters inside the stadium, and these people have already ridden the wave, by the time it spills over into the streets, hooligans are more violent, more caught up in the moment, and then it is only in the situation that responsibility is passed to government when it is too late. The problem here is twofold. Number one, it's completely unfair for authorities because you will blame them for not being able to stop something that's outside when it's already so difficult to stop. But even assuming that we don't play the blame game, let's talk about simple effectiveness. Where is it easier to control violence? When it's being started or sparked by a couple of people inside the stadium, or when it's already infected the entire site so they can spill into the streets and burn cars, Madam Chair. We say, in that particular scenario, you cannot transfer responsibility in the sense that you will not allow national authorities to have prerogative and implementory power within the stadium because that's where it starts, primarily. But even if it doesn't start in the stadium, when it starts in pubs that are sitting right beside each other, Mr. Madam Chair, what is their policy gonna do about that?